There's this feeling I've been noticing lately. It's small, subtle, the kind of thing that goes unnoticed by the majority of people. It's the sense that the world isn't running quite the way it used to. You wake up, you check the news, you check your bank accounts, you check your pulse, just to make sure you're still here. And something about all of it feels slightly tilted. Like the whole world is standing on a hillside, and we're all pretending it's perfectly flat. My character here, this tiny paladin, keeps strolling forward as if the road always makes sense. But the real world doesn't even pretend anymore. Prices rise like mobs scaling with your level. People are stressed, like they're stuck in an endless cooldown. Everyone feels busy, yet no one feels like they're actually getting anywhere. And somehow, we're just supposed to keep moving like this is all the intended design. That's why I started this channel, Paladin Puffball. I wanted a quiet little corner of the internet where we can walk through this strange patch of reality together. No shouting, no chaos, just gameplay in the background, simple, steady, and thoughts drifting around the way leaves drift across Goldshire fields. I'm not here to rant with fireballs flying everywhere. I'm here to wander, observe, and poke at the world, and maybe figure out why things feel the way they do. Why the economy feels like a dungeon designed by a bored developer. Why people are exhausted, even on the days when nothing happened. Why the future feels like a loading screen stuck at 97%. And as my paladin wanders through Azeroth, fighting the occasional boar, running from the occasional mistake, I'll talk through the things that most people carry quietly. The tension, the confusion, the hope that things can get better, just a little better, even if everything looks like it's held together by duct tape and a prayer. That's what this channel will be. A place where the games play and the world unravels gently in conversation. Where we take big ideas and make them feel small enough to hold. Where we notice how odd everything has become, but also notice the tiny sparks of good hiding between the cracks. So if you've been feeling that strange tilt, that off-kilter hum beneath modern life, you're not alone. Grab your mount, walk with me for a bit. We'll explore the world as it is, one quiet ramble at a time. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a bit of clarity out there, somewhere between the trees. There's something strange about the way people talk about tiredness lately. Not the kind you fix with a nap, the other kind. The one that sits behind your eyes and hums like a low drone. The one that makes even simple tasks feel like wading through honey. It's everywhere. You hear it at work, you hear it at home, you hear it underneath the breath of strangers standing in line at the gas station. Everyone says the same thing. I'm exhausted, and I don't even know why. I've been thinking about that feeling, and for some reason, wandering through Azeroth gives that thought room to breathe. Maybe because these digital hills stay the same, even when everything else feels like it's vibrating apart. Burnout used to be something rare, something that hit when you push too hard. Now it feels like the default setting. Almost like the world patched itself one night and quietly toggled exhaustion on for everyone. It's odd how this kind of tiredness doesn't announce itself. It creeps. A little more each week. You start dropping small things, the laundry, the texts you meant to reply to, the plans you swore to keep. And then you wake up one morning and realize you're living life like a character with 30% durability left. But I don't think burnout comes from overworking anymore. Not really. I think it comes from carrying too many invisible tabs that we leave open in our minds. Think about how many worlds we live in at once: your physical life, your financial life, your social life, your online presence, your job, your side projects, your notifications, your worries about the future. Every one of those is like a separate zone loading all at the same time. And the human brain, as remarkable as it is, wasn't built for that level of constant switching. We weren't designed to live in 10 realities at once. Burnout now comes from the weight of modern life, pressing down from every angle, even the angles that we can't see. We're tired because everything demands attention. Every email is urgent. Every headline insists the world is ending. Every app begs for a piece of your day. Every rest feels scheduled. The world has turned us into players stuck in a perpetual combat loop, even when the screen looks peaceful. But here's the curious thing. When you walk through Azeroth quietly, you start noticing patterns. The world has a rhythm, a pulse. Wolves pace in loops. Guards walk in predictable routes. Rivers flow predictably, endlessly, without ever trying to be more than what they are. And somewhere in that gentle repetition, you remember something the modern world tries to make you forget. Humans aren't built to stay on constant alert mode. We're built for cycles: push, pull, effort, rest, focus, ease. But today, everything is effort, everything is push. No wonder people feel hollowed out. There's another layer to the exhaustion, though. One we don't talk about enough. It's the emotional load of watching the world change too quickly. Every year, the ground shifts. Economy up, economy down. Prices keep creeping. Politics grinding people into dust. Technology reshaping the rules faster than anyone can understand. Everyone walking around pretending they're fine while carrying a backpack full of quiet panic. Humans can adapt to a lot, but not at this pace, not without cost. And that's why you feel tired even on calm days. Your mind is trying to make sense of a world that refuses to sit still long enough to understand. There's a strange comfort in moments like that, a simple fight, something to focus on. No ambiguity, no hidden stressors, just a clear threat and a clear action. Real life rarely offers that kind of clarity. Our problems today are shapeless, foggy at best. They nibble instead of strike. And that kind of threat wears you down far more slowly and far more deeply. But here's the thing I keep circling back to. That heavy, vague tiredness doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means something is wrong around you. The world changed faster than our bodies, our mind, our instincts could keep up with. And we're all feeling that drag. Which means the solution isn't to push harder, it's to slow down enough to hear your own internal rhythms again. There's a reason this channel exists, a reason I play this game while talking about the world outside of it. Azeroth has space. The real world does not. Here things wander. Here moments linger. Here you can breathe without being asked for something every 6 seconds. This channel, Paladin Puffball, is a space to do the same. to explore these heavy topics without rushing, to let your brain exhale, to notice the weirdness of the modern world without drowning in it. Burnout isn't a character flaw. It's a sign that the world has become too loud, too fast, too demanding for the pace humans are meant to live at. But we can reclaim pieces of slowness, moments of thought, little pockets of peace, even while everything outside keeps buzzing. So, if you've been carrying that strange exhaustion with you, the one you can't explain, the one that clings even after a full night's sleep, you're not alone. Walk with me for a while. We'll wander through these digital fields, pick apart the way the world actually feels, and maybe find answers tucked between the trees. Not all at once, not urgently, just step by step, thought by thought, until eventually the fog lifts and the world makes a little more sense. But until then, we walk forward. Life in America is starting to feel like an MMO where someone keeps adding microtransactions to the tutorial. Existing used to be free, or at least reasonably priced. Now it's like the universe woke up one day and said, you know what? Breathing should cost $9.99 a month. Today, we're diving into the bizarre reality of simply trying to live here in the United States. Why it feels harder than ever. Why the price of everything keeps leveling up faster than we can. And why so many young Americans feel exhausted before the quest even begins. Welcome back to Paladin Puffball. Grab your buffs, your snacks, and maybe your wallet, because surviving might have a new subscription fee. Imagine WoW if each new zone required a separate payment. $800 to enter this forest, $1,500 to use that inn, $60 just to repair your armor, every single time. That's the housing in America right now. Whether you rent or buy, it feels like the landlord owns a legendary artifact called Inflationary Blessing, and they've been stacking enchantments on it for decades. People keep saying, just get a starter home, as if those still exist. Starter homes have evolved into mythological creatures you only glimpse on Zillow before they disappear, snatched by a cash buyer from 3, 4, even 5 states away. So many Americans aren't trying to get rich, they're just trying not to get priced out of existence. A place to sleep shouldn't feel like legendary tier loot, yet here we are, rolling need on basic survival. Grocery shopping used to be boring. Now it's an extreme sport. You stroll into the store with confidence and walk out traumatized holding a single bag that costs more than your first car did. Chicken, expensive. Eggs, a financial commitment. Bread, a negotiable relationship. And the weird part is, nobody asked for fancy. We're not begging for artisanal, free-range water and handcrafted inflation. Just normal food. The kind of food that keeps you alive without requiring a cosigner. In most games, when you take damage, you heal. Simple. In America, healing requires a credit check. Get injured? It'll be $12,000. And that's before they tape you back together. Even with insurance, you need insurance for your insurance. Other countries look at our healthcare system and ask, is that a bug or a feature? And we just shrug. Nope. That's a patch. Welcome to 2025. Healthcare isn't a game mechanic here, it's a boss fight. And the boss is your own medical bill. Here's where the real absurdity begins. The cost of everything levels up consistently. But your income? Your income is like a level 15 character stuck farming boars because the XP bar refuses to move. People work harder than ever, longer hours, multiple jobs, side hustles, content creation, selling old loot on marketplace apps, and yet still, that feeling of just barely making it. Older generations love saying, "Oh, we worked hard too." And it's totally true, they did. But they worked hard and they saw progress. Young people work hard and see loading screens. It's not a lack of effort, it's a math problem that keeps glitching. There's a hidden cost to all of this, not in dollars, but in durability. When life's economy feels like a scam, your brain keeps whispering, "You're failing." Even when you're holding everything together, even when you're grinding every day, even when you're doing 10 times the work your parents did at your age, stress becomes a background noise. Anxiety becomes a debuff. Burnout becomes a lifestyle. And that's the part nobody puts into economic charts. The human toll, the emotional tax, the cost of consistently pretending you're fine. Sometimes the most expensive thing you pay is yourself. Despite all of this nonsense, people keep going. They keep trying. They keep inventing new ways to survive and to thrive. Roommates into adulthood, remote work, online entrepreneurships, community networks, digital careers, 1,000 different new strategies to navigate a system that looks completely unbeatable. Young Americans are like that one player who refuses to uninstall. They find the loopholes. They min-max the economy. They optimize reality. And every time someone says you can't, they figure out a way. As this paladin keeps running through Azeroth, remember, if life feels expensive, it's because it is. If you feel like you're grinding constantly, you are. If it seems like the rules changed without warning, they did. But if there's one thing this generation does better than any before it, it's adapting to chaos. America's cost of living might feel like premium DLC, but that doesn't mean the players give up. We're still here, we're still fighting, and we're still leveling. One quest at a time, one day at a time. So, thanks for hanging out in this weird fusion of gaming and reality. More rants, more gameplays, more honesty coming your way. Just remember to subscribe for more. Stay sharp, stay hopeful, and keep your goals close. You never know what they'll charge for next. There's a strange feeling hanging over the world right now. A feeling that everything is slightly just out of reach. Not impossible, just annoyingly far enough that you have to stretch a little more than you should. And if you're a millennial or Gen Z, that feeling isn't new. It's the background hum of adulthood, like the sound of an old refrigerator running in a dimly lit apartment. You get used to it, but you never stop noticing it. This episode is about that hum. about inflation, about the treadmill slightly tilted uphill, and about the quiet frustration of doing everything right and still feeling like you're stuck in place. Welcome back to Paladin Puffball, where we play World of Warcraft. Well, we dissect the strange world outside this screen. So let's dive in. Inflation is one of those things everyone talks about, but nobody really explains. It's like hidden patch notes of real life. Everything changes, but the devs just forgot to tell us. Bread costs more, rent jumps every year like it's doing CrossFit, streaming services multiply like rabbits, and suddenly you're spending more money than you ever intended without even upgrading your lifestyle. For older generations, inflation feels like weather. Sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's not. They've lived through a lot of cycles. But for millennials and Gen Z, we didn't just get weathered on. We got dropped into a storm during a tutorial that said press W to move forward, but forgot to mention the hurricane that was rapidly approaching. Because here's the truth, inflation isn't just rising prices, it's rising expectations, rising demands, rising minimums. It's the cost of living a normal life drifting further away from what most people can afford. Watch the world long enough, and you'll notice two realities running in parallel. In one world, people say inflation's only 3%. That's not that bad. In the other world, our world, your grocery bill feels like a DPS meter stuck on high crits only. Your rent goes up faster than your paycheck. Your car insurance suddenly costs more than your car. And you're stuck asking the same question every month. How is this sustainable? Spoiler, it's not. But here's the kicker. Millennials and Gen Z are the first generations where the math simply doesn't math anymore. Older generations could work a job, buy a house, raise a family, and still have enough left over to take a vacation once in a while. Now, people joke about avocado toast because we can't afford anything bigger to joke about. That joke hides the truth. Wages stayed still. Everything else sprinted off like a rare mount you'll never see again. Picture a treadmill. A regular one, nothing fancy. Now tilt it, just a little. Not enough to make you fall, but enough to make you sweat. That's the life for millennials and Gen Z. The treadmill analogy isn't dramatic, it's literal. You work more hours than your parents did. You're more educated, you're more connected, you navigate a world that runs 24/7, not 9 to 5. And yet, you're still behind. Not because you're lazy, not because you're irresponsible, but because the treadmill was tilted before you ever stepped on it. College cost more, housing exploded, healthcare inflated like a balloon animal made at a clown convention. Even your hobbies, gaming, streaming, anything modern somehow became expensive. This generation didn't get a head start. We got a headwind. Here's where the frustration becomes existential. People tell younger generations, just work harder. But millennials and Gen Z are working harder. Far harder than the world gives them credit for. They have side gigs. They do freelance work. They open online shops. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. And because everyone is grinding, it warps the baseline. The new normal becomes consistently hustling. And the moment something becomes normal, it becomes invisible. Your effort is unseen. Your exhaustion is unseen. Your financial stress is unseen. But your expenses, always visible, always growing, and always hungry. It creates a psychological disconnect. You feel like you're failing even though you're surviving on hard mode. That's the twisted magic of inflation. As heavy as all of this sounds, here's the weirdly comforting part. Every generation faces a challenge they didn't choose. Ours just happens to be this one. Figuring out how to thrive in a world that got more expensive than anyone admitted. But every single challenge in human history ended the same way. Not with collapse, but with adaptation. And millennials and Gen Z, adaptation is what we do best. We're digital shapeshifters. We're creative, scrappy, resilient, annoyingly stubborn, and surprisingly optimistic, even when everything is on fire. We find loopholes, we find hacks, we find new ways of living, creating, and earning just to survive. If the old playbook falls apart, we rewrite our own. The treadmill might be tilted, but we're the generation that figures out how to sprint uphill. As we continue wandering through Azeroth, remember this. Life feels weird because it is weird. The economy feels broken because parts of it are broken. And generations feeling stuck doesn't mean that they are doomed. It means that they are standing at the edge of a new chapter. And on this channel, this weird little space where WoW gameplay meets real world conversation, it's here to remind you that you're not crazy. You're not alone, and you are not failing. You're simply living through a strange moment in history, one that generations will study with a mix of awe and confusion. Thanks for hanging out with me in Azeroth today. More rants, more quests, more truth, and more puffball coming soon. Stay steady, stay curious, and keep pushing uphill. Sometimes I wonder, when everything started moving at this pace, there wasn't a moment, not that I can remember, when the world collectively agreed to hit the fast forward button. It just happened, quietly and gradually, like a background update that installed overnight while we were just sleeping. One morning you wake up, check your phone, and realize everyone expects you to respond instantly. Decide instantly, adapt instantly, and you're still trying to remember what day it is. It's strange because when you walk through Azeroth like this, the world feels slow, but in the best way possible. Boars still stroll in circles, merchants still stand in the same spot they've stood for almost 20 years now. Time here hasn't been rushed or stretched or twisted. It just is. But outside the game, everything feels like it's accelerating. Workloads, expectations, technology, the cost of simply being alive. And here's the odd thing. Speed feels exciting at first, but then it becomes overwhelming and suffocating. Most of us never said we wanted to live on fast forward. We just got swept into it. Like we were standing next to a flight path and suddenly our character auto-mounted without asking. It's easy to feel like you're the problem, like you're too slow, like everyone else is keeping up just fine while you're struggling to hold onto the reins. But the truth is, humans were never designed for this pace. Our brains evolved for environments where the fastest thing was a running animal. Now, the fastest thing is everything. News, trends, opinions, markets, rumors, jobs changing overnight, technology rewriting itself every time you blink. We live in a world that demands real-time adaptation, and we pretend that that's normal. But your nervous system knows it isn't. That creeping tension that you feel, that little pressure behind your ribs, that sense that you're always behind, even when you're all caught up. That's your biology tapping the brakes while the world slams on the accelerator. Speed changes how you think about yourself. You start measuring your days by productivity, your worth by output, your time by what did I accomplish. And the faster the world moves, the more guilty you feel whenever you slow down. It's funny how WoW helps you notice this. When your character rides across the zone, the world doesn't accuse you of wasting time. It doesn't ask why you're not being productive. It doesn't remind you of deadlines or bills. You just ride. You look around, and you breathe. Real life doesn't leave space for that anymore. Even rest has become something we optimize. Meditation apps, sleep trackers, productivity hacks, as if the only acceptable kind of rest is the kind that makes you more efficient later. But rest shouldn't need justification. Slowness shouldn't need permission. You're allowed to have a pace that isn't synced to the chaos around you. The problem with the world moving this fast is that meaning doesn't keep up. Moments don't land. Conversations don't settle. Thoughts don't get enough time to form before the next thing pulls your attention like an aggroed mob. And when everything moves too quickly, nothing feels anchored. Not your plans, not your expectations, not even your identity sometimes. That's the quiet cost of speed that no one talks about. You lose the sense of where you actually are. You start living on reflex instead of intention. But intention takes time. Attention takes time. Being human takes time. And the world simply doesn't offer much of that anymore. That's why a 20-minute walk in WoW feels like medicine. The world here has the decency to let you exist without pulling at you. This pace, this gentle drift, reminds you what your mind sounds like when it isn't drowning. You start noticing small details again. The rhythm of hooves, the way shadows stretch across the grass, the simple joy of moving at a pace that doesn't demand anything from you. And maybe that's why we feel so overwhelmed today, because most of us haven't moved at our own pace in years. We're constantly adjusting to someone else's urgency, someone else's schedule, someone else's expectations. But you're not a machine. You're not meant to run at maximum all the time. You're not built to update every time the world does. You are a person, and people need room to slow down sometimes. This channel exists for that reason, a place where the world settles down, where gameplay doesn't rush you, where thoughts can stretch their legs instead of sprinting. If you felt like life is sprinting away from you, like no matter how fast you move, it's never quite fast enough, you're not failing. You're experiencing something unnatural. The world changed its speed. We didn't. And that's okay. Walk with me for a while. Let's slow the world back down. Not perfectly, not permanently, just enough to breathe again. Step by step, at a pace that actually feels human. There's a certain kind of moment everyone dreads. It starts small. A cough, a pain that feels sharp instead of dull, a weird lump, a sudden fever that hits like a fireball from a caster you didn't even see. Most places in the world, that's when the quest begins. Find healing, seek help. But in America, that's when a much different questline begins. A sprawling, confusing, ever-shifting labyrinth known as the healthcare system. And this labyrinth doesn't play fair. There are no bright quest markers, no friendly NPCs with a yellow exclamation point, just a maze of doors, each guarded by someone who asks, "Do you have insurance?" before you're allowed to take a single step inside. Today's story is about that maze, the one people don't choose to enter, but eventually stumble into anyway. Most journeys start with hope. The healthcare journey starts with a sinking feeling. You know the one. The moment you realize you might need real help. The moment your body stops playing by the rules. For most adventurers in Azeroth, health is simple. Your HP drops, you heal, and you keep moving. But in America, the real world has a mechanic Azeroth would never dare include. Healing costs gold. Lots and lots of gold. Sometimes more gold than you'll ever have. So, people hesitate. They bargain with themselves. They wait longer than they should. Because the fear of medical debt sometimes hits harder than whatever's hurting. That's the first trap of the maze. The door you're afraid to open. Let's say you work up the courage to seek help. You open the first door. Behind it is insurance. A system that should be a healer, but behaves more like a bureaucratic dungeon boss. Deductibles, copays, co-insurance, out-of-network penalties. In 1 year alone, over 100 million Americans carry medical debt, and nearly 1 in every 3 delay care because of this cost. Imagine if every time your paladin needed healing, you had to check whether the healer was in network, or be charged 10 times the amount. Imagine if accepting a heal triggered a surprise fee you only learn about 3 months later through the mail. That's the American mechanic. You don't know the cost to heal until after you've healed. It's a system where the damage is predictable, but price is not. So you find a doctor. You limp into the office. You think the worst is behind you. But the healthcare maze loves a plot twist. The doctor sends you to a specialist. The specialist sends you for tests. The test sends you for imaging, and the imaging sends you for labs. Every step feels like a subquest, each one with its own rules, paperwork, and costs. Half the time, no one even tells you the price, because no one knows. Prices shift daily. They vary by insurance plan, by location, even by negotiation. The US is the only high-income nation, where a broken arm can cost anywhere from $500 to $20,000 depending on the hospital, the insurance, and the roll of invisible dice. This isn't a maze, it's a roguelike. Procedurally generated, unforgiving, and full of surprises you never asked for. Then comes the end of quest boss, the bill. And unlike in WoW, this boss doesn't appear right away. It waits, it stalks, it lurks in the shadows of your mailbox. Weeks pass, then months. Then, without fanfare, without warning, the envelope appears like a cursed drop. Inside is a list of changes, written in a language older than Titan runes. Facility fees, provider fee, processing fee, non-covered services, out-of-network penalty, and miscellaneous. You scroll through it the way you scroll through patch notes, confused, overwhelmed, and fairly certain none of this should even exist. And the total at the bottom? A number that hits harder than any raid wipe. Medical bills are the #1 cause of bankruptcy in America. No other developed country even comes close. Not because Americans get sicker, but because they get charged more for the privilege. Behind the stats, there's something deeper, something heavier. The healthcare maze doesn't just drain bank accounts, it drains hope. People work through the pain because they can't afford care. Parents ration medication to afford their kids' treatments. Young adults skip appointments because their deductible is higher than their savings. Elders fear the ambulance bill more than the heart attack. Every year, millions delay care due to cost, and thousands die because of it. This isn't an accident, it's the system working exactly as designed. If WoW operated this way, players would uninstall by noon. But real life doesn't allow for uninstalls. Here's the part most people never see. The maze isn't broken, it's profitable. Insurance companies profit when you stay out of the system. Hospitals profit when they charge wildly different prices. Middlemen profit when billing is so complicated that their entire industries exist to navigate it. In America, healthcare isn't a service, it's an economy. One that consumes nearly $4.5 trillion a year and still produces worse outcomes than countries that spend half as much. The US ranks last among developed nations for healthcare affordability, yet spends the most per person. That's not inefficiency, that's an intentional design. Because even when in the darkest maze, there is always a path. Not a perfect one, not yet at least, but one built on something the system can't monetize. People who refuse to accept absurdity as normal. Communities building mutual aid networks. Doctors opening transparent pricing clinics. States capping predatory billing. Young generations demanding something better. It's not a boss fight we win in one attempt. But every generation of players learns new strategies. And we're getting closer to the part where we stop totalitarian insanity, just because it's been around for a while. The maze won't collapse overnight, but the cracks are forming. And the truth? Most mazes eventually get mapped. The healthcare crisis isn't just policy, it's personal. It affects everybody, every family, every future. And the heroes aren't corporations, or lawmakers, or lobbyists. It's the people who walk into the maze anyway, terrified, unprepared, underinsured, and overwhelmed, because they have no choice. That's courage, real courage. And if you've ever navigated this maze, even once, you are so much stronger than you think. Stay alive out there. Stay curious. Stay hopeful. And may your next visit to a healer cost less than a legendary mount. There's a house I used to walk past when I was a kid. Nothing fancy. White siding, a porch swing, a little garden that always survived the winters better than it should have. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a castle. It was just a home. When I was growing up, people would point out houses like that and say, one day, you'll have one of those. Like it was a quest reward waiting for you at the end of adulthood. But somewhere along the line, the quest changed. The reward changed. And the house on the hill became something else. Something further away than anyone ever expected. That's where today's story begins. With a simple home and the question of why something so ordinary became the stuff of myth and legend. There was a time in America when buying a home wasn't a privilege. It wasn't a status symbol. It wasn't something you needed a spreadsheet and divine intervention to accomplish. In the 1950s, the average home cost about 2 to 3 times the average annual salary. One job could support a family. One income could make the mortgage payment. Starter homes were everywhere, small, simple, mass-produced by young people beginning life. They weren't luxury builds. They didn't have granite countertops forged by the gods. They didn't have walk-in showers the size of an entire pantry. They were normal and common. The world was balanced. The starting zone was fair. But then, developers changed the rules. The first major shift was subtle. We stopped building small homes. Not because people didn't want them. Not because families didn't need them. But because big homes meant bigger profit. Builders realized something. If they were going to spend time, land, and labor, they might as well sell the most expensive home possible. So, starter homes quietly vanished from the loot table. From 1980 until now, construction of entry-level homes fell by more than 80%. An entire category of shelter simply evaporated. Imagine for a second if Blizzard removed level 1 through 20 zones and told new players, good luck, you spawn directly into a mythic raid now. That's the modern housing market. Then came the second shift, the arrival of a new type of player. Not families, not couples, not first-time homebuyers, but investors. Private equity groups, corporate landowners, cash buyers who don't flinch at a bidding war. In some cities, 1 in every 4 homes is now bought by an investment company instead of a person. To them, a house isn't a dream. It's an asset, a checkbox, a monthly yield. And you can't outbid someone who doesn't need a mortgage. People bring hopes and savings. Investors bring algorithms and capital. Lots of it. It's like showing up to the battleground with a rusty sword, only to find the enemy has a mythic tier gear and no cooldowns. You never stood a chance. So, you rent. You save, you plan, and you try again. But rent rises faster than wages. Every year, the landlord levels up and you don't. The average renter in America is now considered rent burdened, meaning over 30% of their entire income goes to keeping a roof over their head. That isn't stability. That is a treadmill tilted uphill. And here's the cruel twist. You can't save for a house when you spend every month just trying not to drown. Renting used to be step 1. Now it's step forever. Once upon a time, roommates were a phase. Something you did in your 20s while eating leftover pizza and leaving dishes in the sink. Now, roommates are a strategy, a survival mechanic, a shield against the crushing cost of existence. Teachers have roommates. Nurses have roommates. Young parents are moving back home. Grown kids are living with their grandparents. People with full-time jobs share bedrooms. This isn't immaturity, it's flawed math. A single income doesn't stand a chance against modern rent. A dual income struggles. A household of 4? Maybe. The party size required to survive this quest keeps growing. Here's the part people don't like to talk about. If your parents or grandparents bought a home a long time ago, they unintentionally stepped into a time machine. Their home doubled, tripled, even quadrupled in value. Not because they worked harder, but because they got in early. For younger generations, that door is locked. Not metaphorically, literally locked. Starter homes used to cost $60,000. Now, they're starting at $350,000. Wages did not grow sixfold, not even close. The game got harder, and someone forgot to tell all the new players. A home is more than 4 walls. It's security, identity, belonging, a launch pad into adulthood, a place to store your loot and log off without fear. Without that grounding, everything feels temporary. People delay marriage. They're delaying children. They are delaying their dreams. Floating from rental to rental feels less like living and more like respawning in a new location every year, whether you want to or not. A stable home creates stable people. A shaky home creates shaky futures. And right now, millions feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. But here's the thing about every crisis. It creates the heroes who will eventually fix it. All across the country, new movements are taking shape. Cities building smaller, denser, and smarter housing. Communities pushing back on corporate landlords. States banning predatory bidding practices. Young people forming co-ops and shared equity homes. Builders returning to simpler, more affordable designs. And policies shifting towards the idea that shelter is not merchandise. No single fix will solve the problem, but history shows something important. Impossible systems always crack when enough people refuse to accept them. And this generation, it's not quiet, it's not complacent, and it's not giving up. I drove past that old house recently. The porch swing is still there, the garden still alive, but the price completely out of reach for most people starting out today. That house didn't change. The world around it did. And that's why this story matters. Not because the past was perfect, but because the future doesn't have to be impossible. The housing crisis isn't a personal failure. It's a system failure. One we inherited, and one that we can change. The quest for a home has always been part of the human story. This chapter is harder than it should be right now. But every difficult quest eventually becomes a victory tale. Remember, stay hopeful, stay stubborn, and keep pushing. Even mythic loot drops eventually. There's a bridge in almost every fantasy world, a sturdy one, the kind built of thick stone stretching over a canyon or a river. You cross it without thinking because bridges are supposed to be reliable. For decades in America, the middle class was that bridge. It connected where you were to where you wanted to go. Work hard, move forward. Save, build wealth. Live decently, retire eventually. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't elite. It was simple yet stable, safe. But if you walk that bridge today, you'll hear something unsettling. A crack beneath your feet. You'll see missing stones where they used to be. The bridge hasn't collapsed all at once, but it is disappearing, quietly, piece by piece. And this is a story of how it's happening. There was a time in America's not-so-distant past where middle class wasn't an aspiration. It was default. A single income could buy a home, raise a family, save some money, take a yearly vacation, and still retire with something left over. Jobs paid enough. Groceries didn't require a strategist. College didn't cost the same as a small castle. Healthcare didn't demand tribute like a dungeon boss. Life wasn't easy, but it was able to be navigated. Then the world changed, and the middle class became something else. A shrinking island slowly eroded by tides. There wasn't one force that caused this. There were three. Force one, wages stopped moving. For most of the last 40 years, wages stayed nearly flat, while the cost of living sprinted ahead. Your paycheck stayed the same. The world didn't. This created the first crack in the bridge. Force 2, the cost of essentials exploded. Housing, healthcare, education, transportation, and food. Not luxuries, not treat yourself items, just the basics. Over the last generation, these climbed faster than income by enormous margins. A home once was only 3 times the average salary. Now, on average, it's 7 to 10 times the average salary. College is up over 1,200%. Healthcare, up over 300%. A middle-class life started requiring upper-class money. And the third force, wealth drifted upward. When productivity rose, the gains didn't go to the workers, they went upward. Shareholders, executives, corporations. The top 1% gained more wealth in the last decade than the bottom 50% combined. The loot table changed, but no one announced this patch. There's a simple image that captures it. A 1950s family. One parent works, one stays home. They own a house, 2 cars, and have savings. The modern family in 2025, both parents are working full-time. More often than not, they have an extra side gig. One of them is always pulling overtime. And yet, they are still struggling. The math changed, and the treadmill was tilted uphill. And when a society requires 2 incomes just to barely float, you no longer have a middle class. You have a stressed class. The middle class didn't disappear into poverty. For many, it disappeared into exhaustion. Almost comfortable, almost secure, almost stable, almost able to save, and almost able to breathe. They live one bad month away from disaster, one medical bill, one car repair, one layoff. Middle class is no longer defined by what you have. It's defined by what you're terrified to lose. In WoW, you always know when you're progressing. Your XP bar moves. Your gear improves. Your character gets stronger. In real life today, progress feels inverted. People work harder than ever, yet feel less secure, less able to build, less able to grow. The American dream didn't vanish. It just walked into the fog so thick most people can't see it anymore. That messes with your head. It makes you feel like you did something wrong, when in reality, the system shifted beneath your feet. The middle class used to have a margin, breathing room, energy. But now, people are tired. Not lazy tired, not I didn't sleep well tired. The kind of deep bone level exhaustion that comes from carrying weight you weren't built to carry. The disappearing middle class didn't create stress. It created chronic stress, the kind that sits behind your eyes and whispers, "You're always behind, no matter how hard you try." This is the emotional cost people don't talk about. An economy that eats away at your hope is just as damaging as one that eats away at your paycheck. The danger isn't the middle class shrinking, it's what's replacing it. A stratified society, those who own assets and those who never will. Those who grow wealth by existing and those who fall behind no matter how hard they work. This isn't dystopia. It's the direction we're heading unless the game changes. A nation without a middle class is a bridge that can no longer carry anyone across. But here's something beautiful. When the world gets unbalanced, people adapt. They innovate. They unite. Across the country, quiet movements are forming. Community land trusts, new unions, local reforms, affordable housing pushes. The middle class isn't dead. It's being rebuilt differently, from the bottom up, by people who refuse to accept a future made only for the wealthy. This generation isn't weak. It's resourceful, it's stubborn, and it's strategic. It's the kind of generation that turns a broken system into a new meta. If you feel the ground shaking beneath you, if you feel the bridge isn't holding, if you're scared you won't make it to the other side, you're not imagining it. You're not failing, and you most certainly are not alone. The middle class is disappearing. Not because people broke their end of the deal, but because the deal changed. But here's the part that matters. Bridges can be rebuilt, better, stronger, and for everyone. And it always starts with people who see that the world is cracking and decide to walk across anyway. Remember, stay stubborn, stay hopeful, and keep logging in. This story isn't over yet. There's a moment that happens to almost everyone now. You walk into the grocery store, not with fear, not with dread, just a simple plan. A list of 5 things: bread, eggs, fruit, chicken, and maybe a snack if life has been kind. You walk the aisles like you've done thousands of times before. Nothing looks different. Nothing is sparkling gold or wrapped in velvet. But when you reach the checkout, the total pops up. And there's this strange pause, a gap between what you expected and what the world just handed you. Groceries cost more than they should, more than they ever did. more than the math in your head prepared you for. And today's story is about why. Not your surface level answers, the real ones. The hidden mechanics. The boss level systems quietly shaping every price on the shelf. To understand why food costs feel like buying epic loot, we have to go back to the moment the world broke. The global shutdown. Factories closed. Shipping stalled. Farms were struggling. Labor vanished. And demand shifted overnight. And the supply chain, the invisible network moving food from seed to store, cracked all at once. Some of those cracks are still there. When supply falls and demand rises, prices climb. And this isn't greed, it's unfortunately just economics 101. But the story doesn't stop there, because after the crisis ended, prices didn't fall back down. They stayed. And then they climbed higher, which leads us to the next chapter. And that is, most people don't realize how many hidden layers exist between the farm and your fork. Every layer got more expensive. The fuel to run tractors and trucks, fertilizer up over 80% in some periods, animal feed spiking due to global shortages, packaging materials like plastics and cardboards, cold storage and electricity all jumped. Labor shortages across farms, factories, and transport. When the cost to produce food rises, the final price reflects every step of that chain. If WoW mobs dropped fewer materials and crafting costs doubled, you'd expect the auction house to shift too. That's what happened in real life, except you can't grind boars to fix it. Here's a plot twist most people don't know. A handful of giant corporations control most of the grocery industry. In meat processing, just 4 companies control nearly 80% of the entire market. In retail groceries, a few chains dominate entire regions. When competition shrinks, prices don't just reflect the costs. They reflect power. If one company raises prices, others follow. Not because they must, but simply because they can. That's why so many items jumped at the same time, with the same excuse: supply issues. When a market becomes that concentrated, consumers lose bargaining power. The middle class pays the difference. Shrinkflation is like a sneaky mini-boss, and you've met this one. The cereal box is the same size, but somehow half full. The chips look normal, but contain 7 chips and a dream. The candy bar didn't get more expensive, it just got smaller. Again. This is shrinkflation, and it exists because companies know consumers will notice price increases, but not always size reductions. It's the economic equivalent of a stealth debuff. Your gold buys less even though the interface hasn't changed, and companies are brazen about it, reducing products by 10 to 30% with identical packaging. Same cost, less food. That difference is pure profit to the company. Behind every loaf of bread and every carton of eggs is a web of global pressures. Droughts, floods, war, trade disruptions, bird flu wiping out millions of chickens, climate instability affecting harvest cycles. Food is fragile. It depends on weather, stability, and predictability. We don't control much of that. When global shocks hit, they ripple straight into your grocery bill. A world in turmoil becomes a store in turmoil. Now we get to the shadowy part of the dungeon, the room many companies hoped we wouldn't look into. During the worst inflation spikes, corporate profits in the food industries hit record highs. Some companies publicly admitted they raised prices more than necessary simply because consumers already expected increases. In other words, we increased prices because we could. Not every company did this, but enough did to move the entire market. And once a higher price becomes the norm, it rarely goes back down. There's no reverse inflation spell. No vendor that says, you know what, let's lower prices. The system has no incentive to reset. All of this would just be economics if it didn't land on real people. Families buying less, parents skipping meals for their kids, single adults budgeting like field generals. Young people joking about eating ramen, except it's not a joke anymore. Elders choosing between medicine and groceries. The stress of grocery shopping, something that should be small, ordinary, and forgettable, becomes a monthly reminder that the world is heavier than it used to be. Food shouldn't feel like a luxury. Survival shouldn't feel like a financial test. Yet, here we are. But the story doesn't need to end in despair. There are bright spots on the map. Local food co-ops growing rapidly. Farmers market expanding access. Policy movements aimed at food affordability. And younger generations pushing for systematic change. And historically speaking, every period of runaway food costs eventually breaks under its own pressure, and reforms follow. Nothing stays impossible forever. Even the toughest dungeons get nerfed. If grocery shopping feels stressful, if your total makes your stomach drop, if you keep asking, how is this normal? It isn't personal. You're living inside a story reshaped by global shocks, corporate decisions, and broken incentives. Your struggle isn't incompetence. It's experience points earned in a world that became more expensive than it should have been. And your awareness, your refusal to accept that's just the way it is the beginning of a change. Because the more we understand the map, the easier it becomes to find the exits. Remember, stay hopeful, stay curious, and may your next trip to the grocery store be kinder than the last. It started the same way so many modern stories do. A headline, a number, a sentence designed to make people freeze mid-scroll. It read, "The real poverty line is $140,000. For some people, that number landed like a slap. For others, it felt validating. For most, it was confusing in a way that lingered. Because $140,000 doesn't sound like poverty. It sounds like success. It sounds like comfort. It sounds like winning the game. And yet, when people sat with it for a moment, a strange thought crept in. Then why do so many people earning good money still feel like they're barely holding it together? That's the question this story is really about. Not whether $140,000 is the poverty line, but why the idea doesn't feel completely absurd either. To understand how we got here, we have to rewind the timeline. The official US poverty line was created in the 1960s. It was based on a simple formula. Take the cost of a bare bones food diet and multiply it by 3. Why 3? Because at that time, food made up about 1/3 of a household expenses. That made sense then, but the world has changed. Food got cheaper relative to income, at least. Housing, healthcare, childcare, education, and transportation all exploded. And yet, the poverty line stayed anchored to a model built for a different era. It's like using vanilla WoW stats to balance a modern raid. Technically, the numbers still exist, but they no longer describe how damage is actually taken. So where did the $140,000 number come from? Well, it wasn't pulled from thin air. It came from people trying to answer a real question. What does it actually cost to live a minimally decent life today? Not luxury, not extravagant, just housing in a safe area, childcare that allows parents to work, healthcare without constant fear, transportation, food, taxes. When researchers and writers added up the real modern expenses in high-cost metro areas, the number got shockingly large. Not because people were living lavishly, but because the floor rose, the minimum viable build for expenses. And suddenly, someone earning $120,000 didn't feel rich. They felt exposed. Now, here's where the story gets important. Economists looked at the $140,000 claim and said, no, that's not poverty. And they're right, technically. Poverty has a specific meaning. It refers to deprivation so severe that basic needs cannot be met. Someone earning $140,000 is not poor, by any serious definition at least. Calling them poor collapses the meaning of the word. If everyone is poor, then poverty disappears as a concept, and the people who are truly suffering become invisible. So, economists aren't wrong, but they're also not answering the feeling people are reacting to. Here's the truth hidden underneath the argument. People don't feel poor at $140,000. They feel financially fragile. They feel like one job loss breaks everything. Like one medical issue ruins them. One rent hike destabilizes their entire life. That isn't poverty, but it also isn't security. It's like having full health but zero armor and no healer in a party. You're technically alive, but one crit ends everything. For decades, the middle class was defined by margin. Room to save, room to absorb shocks, room to make mistakes. Today, many people earning good money have no margin at all. The middle class didn't become poor, it became tight, compressed, stressed, and one patch away from complete and total chaos. So when people see a $140,000 poverty line, They're not agreeing with the math, they're reacting to the loss of breathing room, the disappearance of the buffer zone. This is the distinction that matters. Poverty equals not enough to survive. Precarity equals surviving, but barely, and always one hit away from total collapse. America has both. The official poverty line misses huge parts of lived reality. The $140,000 number exaggerates the label, but together they reveal something important. Our economic language is outdated. We have words for poor and rich, but very few for technically okay but consistently anxious. That's the new normal. When definitions break, policies break. If poverty looks smaller on paper than it is in life, help arrives too late, or not at all. If everyone who's struggling is told, well, you're not poor, their pain gets dismissed. And when pain gets dismissed long enough, people stop trusting institutions altogether. This isn't about redefining poverty upward. It's about recognizing how cost of living transformed the game. The difficulty slider moved. The UI didn't update. So, no, the poverty line is not $140,000. But the fact that so many people paused at that number and said, yeah, that kind of tracks, should worry us. Not because they're poor, but because they feel unprotected. The real story isn't about redefining poverty. It's about a society where even winning doesn't feel safe anymore. And until we fix that, the numbers will keep getting stranger, and the arguments much louder. Remember, stay thoughtful, stay curious, and don't let broken definitions convince you that your experience isn't real. There's a strange exhaustion people carry now. Not the kind you fix with sleep. Not the kind that disappears after a weekend. It's deeper than that. It's the feeling that no matter how hard you try, no matter how early you wake up, no matter how much effort you put in, the reward just doesn't match the cost anymore. But you still show up. You still work. You still try to be responsible. But something feels off. Like you're pouring everything you have into a system that no longer pushes anything meaningful back. This episode is about that feeling. Why work for so many people doesn't feel worth it anymore. Not because people are lazy, not because they don't want to work, but because the work-reward contract quietly broke. For a long time, there was an unspoken deal. You didn't need it written down, everyone just knew. And it went like this: work hard, be reliable, improve your skills, stick it out, and in return, you'd earn stability. You'd move forward. You'd build a life. You'd feel like your efforts mattered. The contract wasn't about getting rich. It was about progress. The amount of effort you put in equaled life getting better. The belief powered generations. And for a while, it worked. Somewhere along the way, the math changed. Wages slowed, costs accelerated, productivity went up. But compensation didn't follow. People started working more hours for less purchasing power. 2 incomes replaced 1. Side hustles replaced rest. Passion replaced pay raises. And slowly, almost invisibly, the reward side of the contract shrank. The effort stayed the same. In many cases, it even increased. But the payoff delayed, reduced, or removed entirely. That's when the unease set in. Not panic, at least not at first. Just a quiet realization. I'm doing everything right. Why does it still feel like I'm falling behind? In games, there's a big difference between progression and maintenance. Progression feels good. Your character gets stronger, your options expand, your world opens up. Maintenance feels flat. You repair your gear, you restock your consumables, you log in just to keep things from getting worse. Modern work feels like maintenance mode. Paycheck comes in, bills go out, balance returns to 0. No accumulation, no safety buffer, no sense of leveling up. You're not failing, you're just stuck defending the same position over and over again. And defense without progression burns people out fast. For years, the advice stayed the same. Work harder, be grateful, put in your time, climb the ladder. But ladders don't help if the rungs are spaced too far apart and the floor is sinking. People didn't stop believing in effort. They stopped believing effort would be rewarded fairly. That's a crucial distinction. When effort reliably leads to reward, people tolerate the hardships. When effort leads to exhaustion instead, motivation then collapses. Not because people changed, but because the feedback loop broke. Burnout used to be rare. Now it's common, and it's often misdiagnosed. Burnout isn't just working too much. It's working without proportional return. It's giving more while receiving less. It's being told to care deeply while being treated as replaceable. And it's being asked to sacrifice for goals that no longer feel reachable. Burnout is the body recognizing that the cost to benefit analysis is upside down. It's not weakness, it's a signal. Here's where things get serious. When people stop believing work leads to a better future, they don't just lose motivation, they lose meaning. Work takes up a massive portion of life. If that time doesn't build anything lasting, the emptiness spreads. People start asking dangerous questions. What am I doing this for? Is this it? Is this all adulthood is? And when those questions go unanswered, cynicism replaces hope. That's not laziness, that's grief. Grief for a future that was promised but never delivered. Every generation has struggled. That part is true. But here's what's different now. In the past, struggle came from trajectory. You struggled early, so things could get better later. Today, many people see no later. Housing feels extremely unreachable. Retirement feels theoretical. Healthcare feels risky. And savings are fragile. When the future collapses into a permanent present, effort loses its meaning. Why sprint if the finish line keeps moving further and further? Here's the part no one in power expected. People didn't just complain, they adapted. They stopped over-identifying with work. They stopped sacrificing everything. They stopped believing loyalty would be rewarded. They job hopped. They set boundaries. They disengaged emotionally. And they redefined success. This isn't entitlement. It's a rational response to a system that stopped honoring its side of the deal. When the rules change, players change their strategies. That's not rebellion, that's intelligence. This is the heart of the story. Most people aren't asking for luxury. They aren't asking for yachts or private islands. They only want stability, predictability, a future they can plan for, the ability to rest without guilt, and effort that actually leads somewhere. They want the work to reward contract restored. Not perfectly, not magically, just enough to believe again. Work doesn't feel worth it anymore because the spell broke. The spell that said, keep going, it'll all be worth it. When that belief collapses, people don't stop working. They stop believing. And belief is the real engine. If society wants motivation, it has to restore meaning. If it wants effort, it has to restore reward. Because no amount of motivational posters can fix a system where the math no longer works. If you feel this exhaustion, you're not weak, you're not lazy, you're perceptive. You noticed the contract changed. And noticing it is the first step toward rewriting it. Remember, stay thoughtful, stay stubborn, and do not let a broken system convince you that you are the problem. Today's video is a little different. I kept it on script. I'm listening back to the audio in post right now, and I was gonna redo it just because this topic kind of lands a little close for me right now. But I'm gonna keep it. So I apologize if it's not as lively as the previous videos, but I hope you guys enjoy still, and thanks for stopping in. There are days when the world feels like it's running two different versions of reality at the same time. In one version, the headline says the economy is holding up. Growth, jobs, resilience. The language of stability. In the other version, your version, life feels like a constant gold sink. Between rent, food, and insurance, and that surprise bill that crits you when you're already low on health. And the most maddening part is that both versions can be true at the same time. This episode is the story of that contradiction. Why so many people feel broke, even when the economy is supposedly strong. Because this isn't just about money, it's about the difference between macro stats and player experience. And if you've ever played a game where the UI tells you all systems normal, well, your character is clearly on fire, well, you're already understanding the vibe. Picture this. A town crier standing in the middle of a city square. He unrolls a scroll and shouts, "The kingdom is doing well." He points to numbers. GDP growth in the US has ran hot in parts of 2025. Real GDP was reported at 3.8% annualized in Q2. Unemployment in November of 2025 was reported at 4.6%. On paper, that doesn't look like a collapsed civilization. But when you step away from the town square and you walk into the tavern, inside the tavern, people aren't celebrating. They're doing something else. They're comparing grocery receipts like battle scars. They're talking about rent hikes like incoming raids. They're whispering about car repairs the way you whisper about a boss you aren't geared for. That's when you realize the kingdom can't be doing well. Well, the average adventurer feels like they're barely surviving. The economy is an average, a big blended smoothie of millions of lives. But your life isn't an average. Your life is a specific build with specific constraints. Your rent, your wage, your commute, your medical bills, your childcare situations, your debt, and your local prices. If the economy is the server status page, your life is what it feels like in the dungeon. And dungeons can be miserable, even when the server says operational. That's the first truth. Macro health doesn't automatically translate into micro comfort. Employment numbers matter, but they don't tell the whole story. A job can exist while still not paying enough to create stability. A job can exist while the cost of the basics rise faster than your paycheck. And a job can exist while your hours are unpredictable and your benefits are thin. Even when wages rise, the question is, do they rise faster than the costs that you can avoid? The BLS reported real earnings increases over the year. Real average weekly earnings were up 1.4% over the year in November of 2025. That's real progress. But here's the catch. If your rent jumps by more than that, or your insurance premium jumps by more than that, or childcare eats into the entire raise, you still feel like you're sliding backwards. Because for most people, the pressure isn't coming from luxury spending. It's coming from the stuff you can't opt out of. Housing, food, transportation, healthcare. The subscription fees of remaining alive. In games, gold sinks are intentional mechanics. They remove currency from the economy. Repair bills, mounts, reagents, so that the system doesn't inflate out of control. Real life has gold sinks too, except they aren't fun. They're mandatory. And lately, it feels like the gold sinks got buffed. So, what happens? You can be doing fine on paper, earning okay money, employed, paying your bills, and still feel trapped because every month drains you back to zero. That creates a specific kind of emotional fatigue. Not I'm poor, but I'm not building anything. You aren't progressing, you're maintaining. And maintenance is invisible. Maintenance doesn't feel like success. It feels like you're trying to hold the line in a never-ending wave of defense mode. Here's another part of the mismatch. Modern stability is often built on debt. Credit cards, auto loans, student loans, buy now, pay later. The little payment plans sprinkled everywhere like traps. Household debt reached $18.59 trillion in Q3 of 2025, according to the New York Fed's Household Department and Credit Report. That number isn't just a statistic, It's a story about how many people are forced to bridge gaps with borrowed money. Debt can keep you afloat, but it can also make you feel like you're swimming with weights. You're moving, sure, but you're tired. And when your baseline is always tired, good economic headlines don't land as good news. They land as disconnected. Now we get to the mood of the realm. If the economy is so fine, why do people feel so bad? Because people don't experience the economy as GDP. They experience it as whether their paycheck stretches, whether their rent is stable, whether they can handle an emergency, or whether the future feels reachable. Consumer sentiment captures that vibe with a little more structure. The University of Michigan's surveys of consumers showed sentiment around the low 50s in late 2025. 53.6 for October of 2025 is one example. And December of 2025, preliminary data showed to be only a small lift. That's not what a confident kingdom looks like. That's a player base that feels uncertain, cautious, and worn out. And that uncertainty is rational if the lived experience is. One mistake, and I'm in trouble. Here's the part people sense even when they can't explain it. A lot of economic gains don't land evenly. Some parts of the economy can grow while the benefits concentrate upwards. Wealth concentration is one of the clearest signals of this. Federal Reserve distribution data shows the top 1% are holding about 47% of wealth. This was Q2 of 2025. That's not a moral sermon, that's a mechanical description of the system. If the loot drops mostly go to a small slice of the raid's overall DPS can look great, while most players feel undergeared. So the kingdom announces record performance, and the average player asks, then why am I still eating durability costs? So why does everyone feel broke when the economy is so strong? Because the economy is not a single experience. It's a scoreboard, and scoreboards are famous for hiding what matters most: the cost of essentials, the fragility of household finances, the lack of margin, the uneven distribution of gains, the psychological toll of uncertainty. A strong economy can coexist with financial anxiety when the game rewards the system more than the player. And the deeper truth is, most people aren't asking to be rich. They're just asking for that margin back. The ability to breathe, to plan, to make one mistake without completely wiping. That's the feeling behind the contradiction. Not envy, but exhaustion. A map can tell you where the mountains are. It cannot tell you what it feels like to climb them. GDP is a map. Unemployment is a map. Inflation stats are a map. Your rent is the terrain. Your grocery bill is also terrain. Your medical deductible, a terrain. So if you feel like the economy is fine, but your life is hard, you're not going crazy. You're noticing the differences between a dashboard and a world. And noticing it is step one. Because the moment a player understands the real mechanics, they stop blaming themselves for failing a fight that was never balanced. Remember, stay curious, stay stubborn, and keep the party together. We got this. There was a moment when convenience felt like magic. You pressed a button and food appeared. You tapped a screen and the movie started. You signed up once and never had to think about it ever again. No lines, no waiting, no friction. Just smooth, effortless living. At least that was the promise. But somewhere along the way, convenience stopped feeling like a gift and started feeling like a tax. Not a loud one, not an obvious one, but a quiet one. This is a story of how everything got easier and why it somehow costs more than it ever should have. Convenience began as a trade. We gave up a little money to get back time. That made sense. Busy lives, long commutes, two income households, less energy at the end of the day. Delivery apps saved time. Streaming saved trips. Subscriptions simplified life. At first, it felt like a huge win. Like discovering a vendor who sells potions right outside the dungeon instead of forcing you to run all the way back to town. Worth it. Then something subtle happened. Convenience stopped being optional. Streaming replaced broadcast. Delivery replaced pickup. Subscriptions replaced ownership. The default path changed. Try buying software without a subscription. Try watching a show without a platform. Try ordering food without fees stacked on fees, stacked on, you guessed it, more fees. The game no longer asks, do you want convenience? It just assumes you do, and prices everything accordingly. Convenience stopped being a perk. It became the baseline. And baselines are dangerous when they get more expensive every year. Think about how many things quietly bill you every month. Music, movies, TV, cloud storage, fitness, meditation, gaming, software, news, delivery memberships, even heated seats in some cars now. None of them feel expensive alone. That's the trick. $9.99 here, $12.99 there, $4.99 just for convenience. Individually, harmless. Together, a monthly gold drain you never agreed to consciously. In game terms, it's death by passive debuffs. Nothing dramatic, just constant background damage. Delivery apps didn't just add convenience. They added layers. Menu prices, service fees, delivery fees, small order fees, busy hour fees, and don't forget the tip. A $12 meal quickly becomes a $28 meal. And here's the key detail. The restaurants don't get most of that extra money. The driver doesn't get most of it either. The platform does. Convenience didn't just make life easier. It inserted a toll booth between you and everything else. And once toll booths exist, they don't go away. Fees are fascinating. They are rarely framed as price increases. They're framed more as a separate, unavoidable reality. Processing fee, convenience fee, administrative fee. The item didn't get more expensive. It just cost more to access now. Fees are the invisible enemies. They don't show up on the shelf. They appear at checkout when it's too late to back out. In games, that would be called a trap. In real life, it's just business. Here's the hard truth: convenience rarely gets cheaper over time. Once people rely on it, companies stop competing on price and start competing on lock in, exclusive shows, ecosystem integration, loyalty perks, loss aversion. You're not paying for the service anymore. You're paying to avoid the friction of leaving. It's like being bound to a faction you didn't choose. Switching costs more than staying, so price creeps upward, slowly and quietly. And because the increases are small, people absorb them instead of resisting. This is where the story deepens. Convenience doesn't drain money, it drains awareness. When everything is automatic, you stop noticing where your resources are going. Money leaves without pain. Time disappears without memory. Choices happen without reflection. Life becomes smoother, but also blurrier. And blur makes it harder to feel in control. That loss of control feeds anxiety, not panic, just a low hum of unease. I make decent money. Where is it all going? Convenience costs matter more now because margin is much thinner. When rent, food, healthcare, and debt already consume most income, the extra fees don't feel optional. They feel like insults. You're not splurging, you're coping. Convenience becomes survival, and survival shouldn't be monetized this aggressively. But here we are. This isn't an accident. Modern platforms are designed to remove friction, hide costs, normalize subscriptions, fragment spending, and reduce conscious choice. Not because they hate you, but because that's how you maximize revenue in a saturated world. If a game did this too aggressively, players would complain about predatory design. In real life, we just call it modern business. This story isn't about rejecting convenience entirely. It's about intentionality, choosing which conveniences are worth it, canceling the ones that aren't, picking up food sometimes, owning instead of renting whenever possible, and checking the total, not just the price. Not to be perfect, just to be aware. Awareness is the counterspell. Convenience was supposed to make life easier, not quietly more expensive. If everything feels like it costs more than it should, you're not imagining it. You're living in a world where ease is monetized and friction is sold back to you at a premium. The goal isn't to reject modern life. It's to stop letting invisible costs decide it for you. Because when you see the hidden mechanics, you stop blaming yourself for feeling stretched. And you start choosing your path again. Remember, stay curious, stay stubborn, and do not let convenience quietly drain your gold. There was a time when the American dream felt solid. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but sturdy. It was described simply: work hard, play by the rules, build a life. You didn't need to be exceptional. You didn't need to be lucky. You just needed to participate. The dream wasn't about being rich, it was about being secure. A home you could afford, food you didn't stress over, healthcare that didn't terrify you, debt that ended instead of followed you forever. It felt like a foundation that you could stand on. But somewhere along the way, that foundation cracked. Not all at once, not loudly, just enough that people started feeling unsteady, even when they were doing everything right. This is a story of how the American dream didn't disappear, but how it became so fragile. The American dream wasn't a single reward at the end of a quest. It was a bundle: housing, healthcare, food, education, work, debt. Each part held the others in place. If one got more expensive, the others would compensate. If one failed, the rest could absorb that shock. That balance mattered more than any individual promise. And for a long time, the balance held. Housing used to be the starting zone. Modest, reachable, a place to anchor your life. A starter home wasn't a dream house, it was a foothold. Then, prices detached from wages. Homes went from costing 2 to 3 times income to 7 to 10 times income. Rent stopped being a step forward and became a holding pattern. Ownership became something you inherited access to instead of earned. When housing became unstable, everything else feels temporary. It's hard to plan a future when your base keeps resetting. The dream didn't die here, but it started shaking. Healthcare used to be something you worried about when you got sick. Now it's something you worry about before. People delay care, avoid doctors, pray nothing goes wrong. Not because they don't value their health, but because one bad bill can undo years of work. When survival carries a price tag you can't predict, security disappears. In game terms, it's like walking through a zone where any random mob can wipe your progress. The dream assumes you can recover from setbacks. Healthcare made setbacks catastrophic. And I want to go off script here for a second and just to say the price of healthcare alone is absolutely disgusting. I currently, for 3 people, am paying $2,100 a month for healthcare. That's close to $25,000 a year. That's more than most part-time employees make in a full year. The system is flawed. Food was once the simplest part of the dream. You worked, you ate, you didn't think too hard about it. Now, grocery shopping requires planning, trade-offs, and restraint. Prices rise, packages shrink, quality drops. Food didn't become rare, it became expensive relative to income. When feeding yourself requires constant calculation, the dream loses another layer of comfort. You start surviving instead of living. When wages couldn't keep up, debt stepped in. Student loans, credit cards, auto loans, payment plans for everything. Debt became the glue holding the dream together, and the weight dragging it down. Instead of effort leading to progress, effort led to maintenance. You didn't get ahead, you just stayed afloat, barely. Debt doesn't just take money, it takes time, it takes choices, it takes risk. The dream depends on freedom. Debt quietly removes it. Here's the part people feel, but rarely articulate. All of these pressures increased at the same time. Housing got worse. Healthcare got riskier. Food got pricier. Debt got heavier. None of them alone would have broken the dream. But together, they completely compromised it. Like a character whose carry weight slowly increased until movement penalties kicked in. You're still alive, still functioning, but slower, far more tired. One mistake now costs too much. That's fragility. When systems break slowly, people internalize the failure. They think, I should have planned better. I should be further along. I must have missed something. But fragility on this scale isn't personal, it's structural. Millions of people didn't suddenly become irresponsible. The rules just changed. The American dream relied on margin, and that margin vanished. This is where the story turns quiet. When the dream becomes fragile, people stop dreaming. They delay families, they delay moves, they delay risk. But most importantly, they delay joy. Life becomes defensive. Not because people lack ambition, but because ambition feels dangerous. When progress can be undone by one surprise expense, hope feels reckless. Here's the part that history will remember. People didn't give up. People adapted. They questioned old assumptions, rejected broken promises, redefined success, and built parallel paths. Remote work, shared living, side incomes, mutual aid, new values. When the main quest line breaks, players create side quests. This is not failure. This is a form of resilience. The American dream didn't disappear. It was revealed. Revealed to be fragile. Revealed to be conditional. Revealed to need maintenance it never needed before. That's uncomfortable, but also powerful. Because once you see the cracks, you can reinforce the structure. Dreams don't die when they're questioned. They die when they're ignored. If the American dream feels brittle in your hands, you're not imagining it. You're holding something that has changed. And fragile things aren't worthless. They're just honest. They force care. They force attention. They force rebuilding. The dream was never supposed to be easy, but it wasn't supposed to be this hard either. If this generation does one thing right, it will be this: refusing to pretend the cracks aren't there, and choosing to build something sturdier in its place. Remember, stay thoughtful, stay stubborn, and don't mistake fragility for failure. There's a moment almost every young person in America remembers. Someone, a teacher, a parent, a counselor, looks at you and says, education is the key. College is the doorway. If you walk through this door, your life will open up. It sounds magical, like a quest line handed directly to you from the universe. And like every good adventurer, you believe them. You imagine your future, a stable job, a place to call your own, and a path forward. So you take a deep breath and you open that door. What no one tells you is that behind that door isn't a classroom, it's a debt dungeon. And once you step inside, the exit is a lot further away than anyone ever warned you. This is a story of student loans, the promise, the traps, and the weight carried by millions. For decades, college was the golden ticket, a sure thing, a level up. In 1970, the average 4 year degree cost under $10,000 total, adjusted for inflation, of course. Today, it's often $100,000 to $200,000. Tuition skyrocketed, housing doubled, textbooks became their own side hustle. Fees multiplied like mobs in a bad dungeon bull. But the messaging never changed. You were still told, you need this. Everyone needs this. Without it, you'll fall behind. So an entire generation stepped into debt before they even stepped foot into adulthood. College became the toll gate. You had to pay just to join the world. Student loans are unlike any other debt. Credit card debt charges you. Medical debt haunts you. Mortgage debt at least gives you a house. But student loans? They grow when you aren't looking. Interest compounds quietly. Balances rise even when you pay. Forbearance freezes payments, but not interest. Income-based repayment reduces stress, but stretches the timeline to decades. Student debt is coded like a boss that gains HP over time. And for so many borrowers, it feels like the more you fight, the more it heals. This isn't financial planning. It's a slow, grinding battle with an enemy designed to outlast you. Imagine carrying a backpack everywhere you go. Heavy at first, but manageable. You tell yourself, I'll take it off soon. But then years pass. Then a decade. Then two. Student loans follow people through everything: jobs, relationships, moves, layoffs, health scares, buying your first home, starting a family, trying to save, and just trying to breathe. The debt becomes part of your identity, a weight you don't talk about but always feel. Some people carry their student loans longer than they carry their childhood last names. That's not education, that's captivity. Here's the hidden mechanic behind the whole thing. College didn't get expensive because learning got better. No. It got expensive because we changed who pays for it. Decades ago, the government funded public universities. Students paid a small portion. Today, funding dropped, and students are expected to cover the difference. So, universities raised tuitions, banks offered loans, the system normalized debt. Students accepted it because everyone else did prior. And the cycle continued. This wasn't an accident, it was a slow transformation. Education turned from public good into a private purchase. College became a business, students became customers, and degrees became products. And the price tag? Whatever the market will bear. Older generations like to say, I paid off my loans in 5 years. That world doesn't exist anymore. They attended school when tuition cost the same as a used car. Today, it costs a small starter home. The average student loan balance is now over $37,000. Millions owe more than $100,000. And unlike other countries, America charges interest so aggressively. that many borrowers pay double what they originally borrowed. It's the only quest where completing it makes you poorer than when you started. Student debt doesn't only affect money, it affects identity. You question your decisions, your worth, and your progress. You watch friends get married, buy homes, and take trips. And a voice whispers, "You can't." No, not yet. You delay life, you delay risk, and you delay your dreams. You feel behind in a race where you didn't know everyone else started closer to the finish line. This isn't just economic, it's psychological, it's spiritual. Debt rearranges your whole life story. But here's where the story shifts. Young generations are not playing by the older rules. They're questioning the costs, choosing alternatives, seeking trades, starting their own businesses. Student debt wasn't questioned for decades. Now it's one of the loudest conversations in the whole country. And pressure to create change, slowly at first, then all at once. We've already seen expanded forgiveness programs, zero interest repayment windows, calls for tuition caps. The tide is turning. Not fast enough, but it is turning. Student loans are not a moral failing. They're not evidence of irresponsibility. They're the result of a system built on an old promise that no longer matches reality. If you're carrying student loan debt, you're not behind, you're not broken, and you are not failing. You're navigating a dungeon that was never meant to be fair, and you're still moving forward. That's not weakness, that's strength. And someday, when this system finally reforms, as all broken systems eventually do, you'll be one of the people who survived it. Then that makes your story worth telling. Remember, stay passionate, stay stubborn, and don't let your debt crush you. There's a moment people don't talk much about. It happens when you check your bank account after about a month where you did everything right. You worked hard, you paid all of your bills, you didn't splurge, and you skipped the things that you really wanted. And yet, that number in your account barely moved. Or even worse, it went backwards. That moment carries a quiet shame, a whisper that says, "What's wrong with me?" This episode is about that whisper. Why saving money feels impossible. Not because people are irresponsible, but because the ground beneath saving quietly disappeared. There was a time when saving happened almost automatically. You earned money, you paid for basics, what remained stayed. Not because people were smarter, but because life was perfect. But because the gap between income and expenses existed, margin was built into the system. Saving wasn't heroic, it was just normal. Like passive health regen when you weren't in combat. Over time, that gap narrowed. Not dramatically, quietly. Rent climbed faster than wages. Healthcare added deductibles and premiums. Food slowly crept upward. Transportation became mandatory and expensive. Insurance spread to everything. And fees quietly multiplied. Nothing alone destroyed saving. Together, they quietly erased it. When every dollar gets assigned before it even arrives, there's nothing left to protect. You're not bad at saving. You're operating in a system that pre-spends your money for you. Saving used to be passive. Now it feels like a high difficulty mechanic. Budget spreadsheets, apps, rules, envelopes, advanced columns screaming, just cut back. But cutting back only works when there's something left to cut. You can't min-max your way out of a structural scarcity. At some point, optimization stops helping and exhaustion sets in. It feels like grinding mobs that no longer drop loot. And here's the cruelest part. The people who need savings the most are the least able to build them because emergencies don't wait for stability. Car repair, medical bill, vet visit, travel for family, rent increases. Every time you almost build a cushion, life crits it away. This creates a loop. You can't save because you have no buffer. You have no buffer because you can't save. That loop isn't personal failure, it's by design. Advice culture loves round numbers. Everyone should save $1,000. Just start with $500. Even $50 a month adds up. And mathematically, that is true. Emotionally, it misses the point. When people can't save, it's not because they don't understand the math. It's because every dollar already has a job. Telling someone to save in that context feels like telling a character with no inventory slots to just pick up more loot. Living without savings changes your nervous system. You become hyper aware. Every sound feels like a threat. Every email could be bad news. Every expense spikes your anxiety. You don't relax, you just brace. This constant vigilance drains energy. It makes people feel irresponsible, even when they're surviving intentionally. Saving isn't just financial, it's psychological safety. And when that safety is missing, everything feels heavier. Here's a twist that confuses people. Even high earners report struggling to save, not because they're reckless, but because higher income often comes with higher fixed costs. Housing scales up, childcare appears, healthcare plans get more complex, taxes rise, lifestyle expectations lock in. Income goes up, margin does not. Saving isn't about income alone, it's about what's left after unavoidable costs. And that's shrinking across the board. Saving requires one thing above all else: predictability. When your costs fluctuate, your job feels fragile, your rent isn't guaranteed, your health feels risky. Savings feels irresponsible. You don't hoard gold in a burning village, you spend it to stay alive. Modern life keeps people in a low-level combat situation just long enough to prevent regen. Here's the truth that needs to be said plainly. Millions of people didn't suddenly forget how to save. The rules changed. A system that demands flexibility, mobility, constant fees, and personal risk while offering less stability will naturally produce low savings. This isn't weakness, it's adaptation. People are using money to survive now, not to prepare for a future that feels uncertain anyway. This story isn't about shaming or lecturing. It's about clarity. Saving becomes possible when housing is stable, healthcare is predictable, income is reliable, emergencies don't wipe everything, and a margin exists. Personal discipline helps, yes, but only after the system stops attacking the buffer. You can't willpower your way into safety when the environment keeps eroding it. If saving money feels impossible, it's not because you lack discipline. It's because the jar never had a chance to fill. You've been pouring water into a container with a dozen tiny holes and blaming yourself for the leaks. Seeing that clearly matters because once you stop blaming yourself, you start asking better questions. Not what's wrong with me, but why is this so hard for everyone? And that's where real change begins. Remember, stay thoughtful, stay stubborn, and don't let a broken system convince you that survival is a personal flaw.